The King of Jordan is in Ottawa right now. He is meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to discuss the Israel-Hamas war. King Abdullah is seeking to shore up international support for an immediate ceasefire in the war.
We need to work on ceasefire as rapidly as possible, but the most important thing is how do we solve this problem once and for all, giving Palestinians a sense of a future, that they have their own state, but also the security of Israel. There's many of us in the region and around the world that are working for the quick ceasefire. And again, I commend Canada's role in this issue, and I'm looking forward to today to looking at some of the specifics that we have to overcome as quickly as possible.
King Abdullah's visit to Ottawa comes as hostage negotiations appear to stall between Israel and Hamas, and while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signals his intent to launch a ground invasion into the densely populated city of Rafah. Arif Lalani previously served as a Canadian ambassador to the UAE, Jordan, and Iraq. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and he previously served as a U.S. State Department official working on Middle East policy and the Arab-Israel peace process. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Arif, I'd like to start with you if I could. King Abdullah's visit to Ottawa comes at this pivotal moment in the war. He's trying to garner international support for a ceasefire when the hostage talks appear to be stalled and talks of that invasion into Rafah are growing. What do you make of the stakes of this visit?
Well, the stakes are very high, and I think it's a very critical time for everybody. As we know, there are millions of people in Rafah who I think are struggling to know what to do, where to evacuate to. The King of Jordan has a very delicate situation in his own country with, basically 20% of people in Jordan being a Palestinian refugees. So it's a critical time. And we don't seem to have a lot of time left. So I think the stakes are getting higher. And I fear a little bit, and Aaron will know this better than me, that I'm a little worried about the leverage that the Americans and others have over the situation at the moment.
Right. So Aaron, that's where I wanted to go next, because that's where the King just was. He was just in the U.S. Meeting with President Biden, the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders since the start of the war. We hear about the impatience and the frustration from the Biden administration with Netanyahu and the Israeli military tactics, but no limitation on U.S. military support so far for Israel. What's your assessment of how that meeting went and where things are?
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with the ambassador as well. Look, I'll give it to you as straight as I can. President Biden's in an investment trap. Having tethered the United States to Israel's war aims, we're now in the 5th month of this war. It's extremely difficult for the president, for any number of reasons, to, I would argue, to bring or exercise the leverage that he does have over the prime minister for one simple reason. American policy hinges right now on an Israeli-Hamas agreement. Without that, you might as well hang a close for the season sign on Washington's capacity to do what I think everybody believes needs to be done, to de-escalate and ultimately end Israel's military campaign, to surge, not dribble, humanitarian and reconstruction assistance into Gaza, and to create some sense of a political horizon that, in fact, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can't be resolved today, but there's a political horizon. 2 states, I would argue, is probably the least worst solution to the problem. But I think we have to be brutally honest here. This conflict has been driven by the motives, the ambitions of 2 primary combatants, both of whom have elevated the stakes to an existential level. And for the Prime Minister of Israel, who has somehow tethered his own political and legal travails, which makes him, frankly, uniquely ill-equipped to lead the state of Israel at this point, you've got that set of considerations as well. So unless you can find a way to figure out a better balance between what Israel wants with respect to day after, how many Palestinian prisoners are they prepared to release, and Hamas's needs and requirements, unless you can find that balance, chances are the situation, as the ambassador has suggested, is going to get worse before it gets worse.
So, Arif, how do you find that balance, right? Because I don't know who can broker that right now. You look at what Canada has said. They said the mass evacuation of Rafah is unacceptable. Emmanuel Macron of France told Netanyahu France opposes an invasion. Biden says no invasion without a credible plan to protect civilians. So a lot of the G7, NATO, Western countries are all saying don't do this. And yet Benjamin Netanyahu is giving every sign he intends to do this. I mean, how do you find the balance that Aaron talked about?
Well, I think the Prime Minister of Israel has laid out, it seems to me, two very difficult to achieve and I think unachievable objectives, primarily, the elimination of Hamas and the release of the hostages. And so I think that it's the Israeli public that I think now needs to make their voice known in terms of what they want from their government. I don't think that, I think American leverage is limited. And I think that each day that goes on or each week that goes on, I actually think the American leverage is less than it was. So I really think that Israelis need to make clear to their government where it is they want them to go. And I think the government really needs, I think, as Aaron has said, to plot out some kind of strategic vision on the horizon, because the military actions week after week are not going to guarantee securities for Israelis. And I think what Prime Minister Netanyahu risks, despite everything he has promised, is perhaps to be the prime minister that leaves Israel the most unsecure it has ever been.
So, Aaron, on that, Israel's security is one thing. Netanyahu's political security is another. And there's some analysis coming out of Israel. I was reading a column in Haaretz today that his talk of Rafah, there's no real capacity for the IDF to go in there in the way he's talking about it right now, with where they're committed in other parts of Gaza. But that this is his way of sending a message to the voters and the public of Israel that he's the guy to finish the job, that he will go all the way from the north to the south, and it's a domestic play as much as it is a strategic play to get rid of Hamas. I mean, how do you see it?
I think that's right. And part of the problem is that the Israeli public, frankly, is as hawkish as I've ever seen it. There are growing pressures from the families of the hostages, but they don't represent the vast majority of the public that is not seen on Israeli TV or social media. The suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. The blood is up in Israel, and they're prepared to acquiesce, I suspect, for a good while longer in Mr. Netanyahu's elusive search for victory. The other problem is that, remember, Mr. Netanyahu is managing two governments. He has his original government, the most extreme right wing in the history of the state of Israel, with two ministers whose views are not only homophobic, but Jewish supremacist. But he's got another government, the war cabinet, composed of Benny Gantz, a putative prime minister and perhaps a successor. And Netanyahu is trying to balance between those two. Israeli public opinion can, in fact, be a big force, but it's a catch-22. Before the Israeli public will go out in the streets and turn the focus against Benjamin Netanyahu, we've got to see some significant de-escalation in the war itself. And I come back to, I know I sound like a broken record here, but I don't see any other alternative. Without an Israel-Hamas deal, and clearly, and here's the paradox, the United States and the international community are in a greater hurry, I suspect, to conclude a deal than the government of Israel, certainly Mr. Netanyahu and Hamas, until you can find some acceptable arrangement that meets the needs and requirements of both, the right balance of Palestinian prisoners for hostages, for example. How long and in what sorts of phases will the hostages be released over what period of time? I think that, as I mentioned, the situation gets worse before it gets worse. I do not anticipate a major Israeli ground campaign for the reasons you suggest in Rafah. We're not on the cusp of such a campaign. But what the Israelis are doing in Khan Yunis in central Gaza, creating an appalling situation for 1.5 million, 2.3 million Palestinians who are bearing the brunt of Hamas's terror surge on October 7th. Again, the Middle East is littered with the remains of great powers who wrongly believe they can impose their will on smaller ones. And I think we're seeing another indication of that.
Arif, the conversations in Paris between negotiators didn't lead to a conclusion. That was followed up by talks in Cairo. So far, there is no conclusion. How do you get the hostages out when that is Hamas's bargaining chip and perhaps the thing that they can hold back? with the surge in rhetoric from Benjamin Netanyahu about going into Rafah, because he stated he wants to eliminate all of them. How do you find a conclusion with such fraught and opposed positions here?
Well, look, I'm also going to sound a bit like a broken record now also. I think you need to take a step back and look at the regional piece. There is a longer strategic piece here for Israeli security, which is a broader piece with its neighbors, particularly Saudi Arabia, which was on the table before October 7th. And at the time, people felt that there had to be something for the Palestinians. Well, that something now has to be quite large and essential. But I think you need to get leaders to step back and say, look, there is a lot at stake here. It's not just a response to Hamas, but you have the chance to have the regional peace that Israel has strived for. And the longer you wait, I think the more elusive it is. And I think the less secure Israel becomes. So I think you need some statesmanship here to do that. And second, I really do believe the United States needs to find other global partners. I don't think they have the leverage on their own over all actors in the region, including Iran, including Israel, and including some of the other Arab countries.
So Aaron, David Miller, just as a quick final point, because we're getting close to out of time. What are you watching for next? I mean, there's so many moving parts in this and so many different components. What are you watching for next to give us a sense of where this might go?
I'm afraid it's all annoyingly negative. The Israeli-Lebanese border concerns me. Until now, Hezbollah and Israel have remained below an escalatory threshold, but that's a real concern. Again, the ambassador is 100% right. We need leaders. Where are you, Nelson Mandela, and where are you, Frederick de Klerk? The truth is, you need leadership of that sort of stature, not to get out of this, but to create and move forward to the political horizon that would guarantee Israelis and Palestinians the security that both peoples have long been denied. I don't see it. That's the problem.
Gentlemen, I always appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and speak with our audience. Arif Lalani and David Miller. Thank you so much, gang.
Thanks for having us.